I'll just give a brief introduction while we're waiting for everyone else to join. So thank you all for joining our webinar today. My name is Nikita Burke. I am the Programme Manager with Evidence Synthesis Ireland, and thank you for taking your time out of your day to join us here. So a brief introduction, Evidence Synthesis Ireland, which includes Cochrane Ireland, is an all-Ireland initiative funded by the Health Research Board and the HSC R&D division of the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland. Our aim is to build evidence synthesis knowledge, awareness and capacity on the island of Ireland. And we have a lot of international people from the UK, Canada, USA and all over the world joining us in our webinars as well. And you're all very welcome. So you can see our upcoming webinars and training at evidencesynthesisireland.ie/training. We will be recording the webinar and sharing the slides on our website under resources later on. And there are closed captions as well. If you want to use them, you should be able to access them on the bottom of your screen, but let me know in the chat if you have any issues. We will have time for questions and discussion at the end. So if you want to type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom, I will ask them at the end. So I will briefly introduce Anna. Anna Knowles-Storr joined Cochrane in February 2008 as an information specialist for the Cochrane Dementia and Cognitive Improvement Group at Oxford. She still holds this position, but since 2016 has led the Cochrane Crowd initiative, a crowdsourcing platform where contributors can dive into tasks that are needed and aimed at helping to identify and describe health evidence. This work has had a major impact on Cochrane's ability to keep up with the deluge of information. And she's also the lead on Cochrane Classmate, a sister platform that enables people to use Cochrane Crowd tasks for engagement and learning activities within their groups. And that's what she'll be talking about today. So I'll hand over to you, Anna.
Thanks very much, Nikita. Thank you. I feel like I probably don't need to do the webinar now. That was such a comprehensive description. I'm really excited to be here today. Before I dive in, I just want to check that you can see my screen okay. It should be a slide saying Classmate, New Ways of Working and Learning Together. Is that showing okay for everybody?
Yes, I can see it.
Fantastic. And my second question, clearly you can hear me okay, so that's great as well. So yes, I'm really excited to be here today to tell you about a tool called Classmate. Oh, let me see. Oh, okay, I'm going to click on that to move the slides. That's fine. So I'm going to structure this webinar like this. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to another platform called Cochrane Crowd, which you've just heard about from Nikita. And this is because to make the best use of Classmate, you do need to have an understanding of the Cochrane Crowd platform and the overall initiative. I'm then going to home in on Classmate itself, giving a bit of background as to why we created it and how it works and what it is. And then I'm going to attempt to do a live demo where I'll set up a learning activity within Classmate. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions and answers. So starting first with Cochrane Crowd. Cochrane Crowd is an online platform that hosts a range of health-related tasks aimed at identifying and describing health research. And anyone can join Cochrane Crowd. It was launched in 2016, and to date we've had almost 20,000 people from over 160 countries sign up to help find and tag health evidence. So this is really an example of crowdsourcing. And so I'll just spend a couple of minutes defining that a little bit further. So crowdsourcing can take many different forms, as we'll explore in just a moment, but as a sort of general definition, I quite like this one. It's the practice of obtaining needed services, ideas, or content by soliciting contributions from a large group of people, and especially from an online community rather than from traditional employees or suppliers. Now, the type of crowdsourcing that an organization might use depends really on the nature of the problem they're trying to solve. And one typology for it that I quite like here was developed by Brabham and colleagues for this problem-focused approach. And in it, they have these 4 different types of crowdsourcing. You can have knowledge discovery and management, where the crowd is tasked with finding or reporting information, such as gathering data on the use of public spaces. You could adopt a broadcast search, which is a call to find a solution to an empirical problem. It's often a sort of scientific or technical problem. Or you could have peer-vetted creative production, so where the organization tasks the crowd with helping to generate new ideas, solutions, or designs. Threadless, the sort of online t-shirt design initiative is a good example of that. Or finally, what you might require in terms of crowdsourced effort is something called distributed human intelligence tasking. So this is where the organization tasks the crowd with analyzing or categorizing large amounts of information. And it's this last type of crowdsourcing, distributed human intelligence tasking, that closely aligns with what we've so far trialed in Cochrane Crowd. So we know, evidence synthesis such as systematic reviews are often quite complex, but they are made up of a number of systematic, rule-driven tasks, making aspects of them ideally suited to this type of distributed human intelligence tasking. These kinds of tasks often require the processing of large data sets. And so what we've tried to do is break those tasks down into what we call their micro format and distribute them to a large online crowd via Cochrane Crowd. And as someone far more poetic than I am described it, it's like the distribution of small parts of a problem. So what we've got on the slide now is an example of one of our Cochrane Crowd micro tasks. So here the contributor is tasked with classifying a research article based on the type of study it describes. Now in Cochrane, around sort of 85 to 90% of the systematic reviews we produce are based on a particular type of study, the randomized controlled trial, or RCT. And then RCTs, as I'm sure you'll know, considered one of the most robust study designs in which to test the effects of treatments or interventions, because they aim to reduce certain risks of bias by randomly assigning participants to the different arms or groups within the trial. So we need to find these randomized controlled trials, and the crowd help us to do that through this micro task. So the crowd contributor is presented with a title and an abstract from a journal article or from a conference publication, or they might see aspects of a trial registration record. And then on the right-hand side are their decision options, which are RCT/QRCT, which stands for quasi-randomized trial, reject, or unsure. And once they've made a decision on a record, the next record then just instantly pops up, ready for them to classify that. And as you can see, we often have highlighted words and phrases on records aimed at helping the contributor to make a decision. On this record, we've got some yellow highlights, which often appear on records that are quite likely to be describing or reporting an RCT. You can get red highlights on records, which act as warning highlights, and they often appear on records that are not RCTs. And quite recently, we introduced some blue highlights, which we think of as directional highlights, just indicating the different parts of an abstract, such as the methods or the background or the results. So a question I'm asked an awful lot about Cochrane Crowd and how it works is, how do we ensure accurate crowd decision making? So each micro task is supported by brief, interactive training, usually made up of a series of practice records. And the aim of the training is to help ensure the accuracy of individual contributors. However, what we're really interested in is ensuring what we call collective accuracy. I mean, even with amazingly comprehensive training, relying on one person's classification alone would definitely not be robust enough. So what we also have behind every micro task is an agreement algorithm. And so an agreement algorithm is simply a set of rules that aims to reach a collective or aggregate answer. And what we can see here is a slightly simplified version of the current agreement algorithm in place for our RCT identification microtask that I've just described. And essentially what it's showing is that 4 agreement classifications are needed on each record, so each title abstract record, for that record to be deemed either an RCT or not an RCT. Importantly, the agreement classifications must be made consecutively by contributors blinded to previous classifications. And any breaks in that consecutive chain, kind of shown by these bottom 2 rows, sends the record off to a special crowd contributor called a resolver. And resolvers are highly experienced in the task, and they will then make that final decision on records where there have been disagreeing classifications or where a record has been assigned an unsure classification. Now, I'm also always asked about who the crowd actually is. So here are some details about the current crowd's characteristics. So this is based on the last 3,000 people to have signed up to Cochrane Crowd. And from this, we have 45.8% are educated to postgraduate level. So a significant proportion of our crowd is highly educated. That said, we do also have almost 20% of our current crowd who don't have a degree. Around 32% stated, and this is the questions that they fill in upon sign up, that they had either no idea or only a vague idea of what a systematic review is, which is quite interesting, I think. But also we have approximately 20% not only know what a systematic review is, but have been involved in the production of at least one. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a large proportion, 42%, are currently students in a health-related area, which may go some way to explain why our crowd is generally a young one. We have 32% aged between 17 and 24 years old, and that's our largest sort of age category. And as I said earlier, contributors are based in 165 countries. So that was quite a quick overview of Cochrane Crowd, but it is important to have an understanding of Cochrane Crowd because without it, Classmate wouldn't exist. Let's move on to talk about Classmate then. So what in fact is Classmate? Well, Classmate is an extension of Cochrane Crowd that enables, and I've said here trainers, but really it's anyone, to use the Cochrane Crowd tasks and standalone learning activities within their own teaching environments. So within Classmate, we've now got 3 main routes you can take. You can set up what we call a learning activity within Cochrane Crowd, and this is kind of a standalone learning activity. In other words, this activity doesn't contribute to the tasks that we have in Cochrane Crowd, such as the one I've just shown you earlier. And we'll take a look at some of those learning activities in a bit. They do serve as a really good introduction to some of the key ideas that will be important for many of the tasks that we do have. You can also set up what we call a task. So that's where you tap into one of those micro tasks. And in that way, you are directly contributing to feeding Cochrane's central repository of trials, for example, or helping to generate gold standard training data for machine learning. Or what you can also do is opt to use one of Cochrane Crowd's new pathways that we have, and I will talk about those in a bit more detail in just a moment. So let's start with the learning only activities. So we have currently 3 learning activities to choose from within Classmate. We have something called Key Concepts. We have another module on understanding study designs, and we have another one on as serving as an introduction to CONSORT. We do also have some additional learning activities coming very soon, so I've popped them onto the slide as well. We have a series of micro-training modules on the topic of health equity. And we have another series of micro-training modules on study designs aimed at the complete beginner. And just to kind of show you, so this is the dashboard icon or dashboard item that you would see for the learning activity called Key Concepts. So it's actually made up of 7 kind of micro training modules within that module of Key Concepts. And each one of these is designed to take between sort of 5 and 10 minutes to complete. In terms of the tasks that are currently available, so those micro tasks, this is what we have at the moment, as well as what we have in the pipeline. So we have 5 live crowd tasks that can be used for Classmate activities. We have RCT identification. We saw a screenshot of that earlier. We have one called DTA identification, which is aimed at identifying diagnostic test accuracy studies. So I would say definitely a more challenging task than the identification of randomized trials. We have what we call CT identification, and this is really about identifying randomized trials from clinicaltrials.gov. So we take a feed from that registry and present certain fields from a trial registry record to the contributor who's got to make a decision as to whether they think it's describing a randomized trial or not. We have a task called PICO extract, and just to say that task is getting a complete revamp this year. It's still a very nice task as it is, but we are working on making it even better this year. And essentially that task is a little bit more in depth than the other 3 tasks. With that task, the contributor is introduced to the PICO framework, and their task is to extract key PICO elements from a title and abstract, all using a controlled vocabulary. And then finally, we have our latest Cochrane Crowd task, which we call COVID Quest. And so this task is all about helping to identify studies that are relevant to the Cochrane COVID-19 Register of Studies. And that, a bit like PICO extract, is a slightly more in-depth task. The contributor is presented with a title and an abstract, and they not only have to make a decision as to whether or not it's eligible for our Register of Studies, and we include a broad range of study designs, so that's again a bit of a departure from just identifying RCTs. They also have to assign certain study design characteristics that the study has, such as whether it's observational or interventional, and what the study's aims were. Was it diagnostic, prognostic? Was it treatment management? That kind of thing. So again, I think a really nice task for people who are, trying to get some experience of health research, how it's reported, how it's described, what it is, and what the latest research is. Obviously, COVID Quest is a very current task and topic. And then just to say, we are now also starting to work on another exciting task for Cochrane Crowd, which is around quality assessment of studies. Our initial focus will be on quality assessment of randomized trials, and we're envisaging that this task will be even more in depth than any other task we've had on Cochrane Crowd to date, and will probably be what we call a full text task. So in this task, the contributor will be presented with the full text of a trial and have to perform a quality assessment on that. So yeah, that's exciting work, hopefully coming later this year. So then the final thing that I want to just talk about before we start actually taking a look at Classmate and setting up an activity is that in March 2020 in Cochrane Crowd, we introduced two what we call pathways. One we call the newcomer pathway, and the other we call the student pathway. And essentially these pathways are a structured program of Cochrane Crowd activities, a mixture of those standalone learning and the tasks that I've just described. And as you can probably tell from the way we've named them, one is aimed really at those who are completely new to all of this, who, you know, have not got any familiarity with health research, trials, evidence-based medicine. And that's the newcomer pathway. And then the other pathway, the student pathway, is perhaps geared more towards those who might have some understanding and some experience in these areas, but still relatively new to it and perhaps studying in a health-related area. Now, these pathways are just the sort of first iteration of the pathways. They will evolve as more tasks get added to Cochrane Crowd. They will be added to the pathways if they're, you know, appropriate for those pathways. So just to sort of flag that they are kind of in beta form at the moment. They seem to be proving very popular in Cochrane Crowd. Completion of a pathway earns you a nice certificate. Yeah, and we can look at those in a bit more detail. In fact, my next slide shows a little bit of a breakdown of what the activities are within each of those pathways. So for example, the newcomer pathway, it's a bit shorter than the student pathway. It's made up of 5 different elements. You start off with doing those key concepts modules. You then move on to a live task, the CT identification task, which is probably our easiest randomized trial identification task that we have on Cochrane Crowd. You then dive back into some more learning only activities with the study design module and the CONSORT module. And then finally, you dive into the RCT identification task. And then with the student pathway, a little bit more to it, but a lot of the same activities. One quite interesting activity is number 4 there, which is called Screen for Me. So this is where the contributor is then tasked with actually joining in with the screening of the search results for a specific Cochrane review. We also host those tasks on Cochrane Crowd. So when one of those tasks comes along, the contributor will have access to it and can help to screen those search results. And if they do 250 or more assessments, they'll get named acknowledgement in the review. So that was, oh, and just to say with these pathways, the estimated time to completion for them is between 8 to 10 hours. So they're not, you know, a month-long course or anything. They, you know, they could be done in over the space of a week very comfortably, I think. But yeah, we estimate they take about sort of 8 to 10 hours. Right, so I will now head over to Classmate. Let me see if I can do that relatively seamlessly. There we are. Nikita, can I just check that?
I can see it, yeah.
You can see it? Okay, fantastic. So this is the homepage of Classmate. The URL is simply the Cochrane Crowd URL /Classmate. From the homepage, I can access some frequently asked questions. I can watch a video about Classmate. But to actually use Classmate, you do need to have signed up to Cochrane and then log in. So if you don't have a Cochrane account, it takes just a minute or 2 to get one, and then you'll be fine. I, of course, do have one, so I'll just log in. So once you're logged in, you get taken to your Classmate dashboard. Now, your Classmate dashboard serves 2 main purposes. It shows you challenges that you've already set up and run, and they're represented by these little panels, and I'll talk more about those in a bit. But importantly, it's also where you can create a new classmate activity. And as I've just shown you in the slides, there are three sort of routes that you can take with this. You can set up a learning activity, or you can set up a task, or you can set up a pathway. And just to quickly recap on the difference between those components, so the learning activity refers to the kind of learning only or standalone learning activities that we've created in Cochrane Crowd. If you were to set up a task, that's where you'd be selecting from the tasks that we currently have available in Cochrane Crowd. And if you selected the pathway option, you'd then choose which of the Cochrane Crowd sort of 2 pathways you would want your group or your students to do. So if we start off by setting up a learning activity, you just click on it, and that starts a series of screens with some questions. So I've got 3 choices here, as I've described. Currently, we have 3 available learning activities accessible via Classmates. So we've got the key concepts, we've got understanding study designs, and we've got introducing CONSORT. And if I click on one of these, it gives me a little bit of blurb below just to remind me what that module is all about. If I want more in-depth information about it, I can either, of course, go to Cochrane Crowd and do it and have a look at it, or I can click on Find Out More, and that will open up a more detailed sheet of information about each of those learning activities. So let's stick with doing the key concepts for now, and then I just click Next. The next bit is just around giving this a name. So I might just call it Let's Get to Grips with Key Concepts. And then you just click Next. The next one is just asking you really whether or not you're affiliated with any institution. This is an optional field. It's just useful for us to know if you're using Classmate in connection with your work based at a certain institution. I'm just going to pop in Cochrane, and then you just click Next. And then the next bit is just to put in a very brief bit of blurb about what this is, because at some stage you might want to invite people to do this activity, and that blurb will appear in that invitation email. So again, I'll just say, let's find out all about some important concepts, and then just click Next. And actually you're almost there already. It's so quick to set up an activity. The next field of, the next screen you get is around the timings of your course. So you've just got to enter a start date and an end date. Now with Classmate activities, tasks, you can set them to last for half an hour, or you can set them to last for months, even years. We've had one guy set something up to last 10 years by mistake, but that was fine. It was possible to do it. So I'm going to put in, I'll just put in today's date, start time, let's see, 12:30 will do. End date, put it in for tomorrow, and then you click Next. And just to say, wherever you're based in the world, the time is adjusted to your time zone. And then just click Next. And then this one is all about, well, who do you want to invite to your Classmate activity? I can put in the people I want to invite at this stage if I know them, if I know that exactly who I'm going to invite, and just copy and paste in the email addresses and do it now. Or I don't have to do it now. I'll show you in just a moment. There is a later stage where you can add or remove participants. I'll just pop myself in. So I'm inviting myself to this activity, and then click Done. And then that's it. You've gone through the setup wizard. You have essentially set up your classmate activity. You've invited someone. You can invite more people. You get onto this screen here, which is called the Participants tab. And it's an important area within Classmate. It's where you can do a lot of the monitoring of your group's activity. But it's also where you can add participants and remove participants. You can also opt to send invites to people, so you don't have to use this option. You could just let them know if you're all in an actual classroom together, which maybe one day will happen again. You can just let them know that they're ready to go to Cochrane Crowd, and they'll see that they've got a classmate activity there. But if you want to use the send invites route, you do that. You just click on it. It has some template text and it inserts that blurb that you entered about the activity. So let's get to grips with some important concepts, or whatever it was that I said. They don't need the email to then be able to access the classmate activity. It's already done within Crowd if you've entered their email address. So that's pretty much it, really. What I'll show you now here is that we've got me. I've joined this activity. Now I've already done this activity in Cochrane Crowd, and that information is being shown over here on the right hand side. So it's telling me that of the 30 questions that are within that activity, I got 29 right and 1 wrong. This bit under here, crowd status. Now this refers more to the crowd tasks. So if I'd set up a task, it would say whether or not I had ever done that task. It would say whether or not I'd completed the training module for that task, but not actually done any live screening on the task. Or it would tell me that I'd also gone all the way and done some live screening, and then it would show me how much I had done, and it would show me whether my assessments agreed with the final decision or not. So you get to sort of see slightly different things. We have a tab here that we're probably going to further develop, because I know that it's going to be useful for people setting up classmate activities to have more information rather than less. But if I click on it now, this is the questions tab. This shows the questions that are in that activity. And it shows me, if I'd invited, say, 10 people to the activity, it would tell me how many had given the correct answer. So I hope that's also quite a useful area for people to be able to kind of monitor which questions are perhaps causing real sort of difficulties that people don't seem to be getting right. I'm going to now go back to the dashboard. Oh, I'll just show you under the details tab. So the details tab is really just all those details that I've just entered to set up the classmate activity is here. I can change my start times, I can change my end time, and I can delete it altogether from here. So I'll go back to my dashboard now, because I did also want to just go through what else you could see on your dashboard. And so what you can see is your current challenges, if you've got any running, and all the previous ones that you might have run. One thing that is different from setting up a task compared to setting up an activity is that within the task sort of setup wizard, you've got one more additional option, and that is to put your group into different teams. And this has proved really popular with classmate users. So say they've got a group of students, a group of 30 students, and they divide them into teams of 10, so 3 teams of 10. And they can do that. All you do, as you set up the task, you just get an extra screen that says, do you want to put your group into teams? How many teams would you like? And then you put the email addresses within each of those teams. And just to show you that this one was one we did in 2 teams when we were in South Africa. you get a couple of extra tabs when you set up a classmate task using one of the Cochrane Crowd tasks. You get this who's winning, which is quite fun, and you can have that live on the screen if you're actually all together in a place and screening away, and you've got two different teams. And here in South Africa we call them the giraffes and the lions, and we had a 10-minute screening challenge, and the giraffes won. And then also under reports you get some information about what was screened, how much was screened, when was it screened, how many joined, and a little bit around what people screened. Did they screen records that they rejected? Did they find the RCTs? And that kind of detail. So I think that's probably enough of me talking. And I think, yeah, I'll hand over now, and very happy to answer any questions or queries or go back over anything where I wasn't clear. Yeah,
Great.
let me know.
That was great. That was really interesting. I've definitely learned a lot. I've gotten stuck into Cochrane Crowd myself and found
Excellent.
the learning by doing